Before I start, I must say that I haven't told many people about this, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me. This happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 80s. I'm male and was about 14 and was babysitting at the neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a nice house, like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where two streets connected. My house was right outside a bus stop, across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought I saw something out the back door. It was one of those glass doors that leads to the porch. It was weird though, because I couldn't see much. You know when the lights are on inside and it's dark out, so you can't see anything but black and your reflection. That's what I saw. But I could have sworn it looked like someone was out there, so I got up and walked to close the windows. It definitely looked like there was something there, but I still couldn't see. I got closer, still couldn't see. I honestly should have just turned on the outside lights, but instead, I put my face up to the glass, cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. Maybe about an inch from my face on the other side of the glass was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't much, and he was staring at me very scary. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. Naturally, I jumped back and let out a short scream, but stupid teenager me didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father came over to take a look. There were still footprints in the front and backyard. I don't remember much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience. You never expect that stuff to happen until it does. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the story because I sure didn't enjoy experiencing it. When I finished uni, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room to rent on the outskirts of town that I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it felt like I was chatting with an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed that he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he had told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but already had decided that I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also off-put by his home decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a game console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name was Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hands on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view, but would be in touch. I then made an excuse to leave. Everything about him screamed red flags. I just wanted to get out of the house. As soon as I got back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I had thought more about moving in. I lied and said I found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a body was found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of it until I saw the murder suspect was his landlord. James. The same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. I feel lucky that these encounters all happened in public places. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. I have freckles and naturally red hair. I'm about 5'7". The first time this man, who appeared to be about the same age and height, approached me while I was in a popular downtown bar with my best friend. I saw this man approach and I was not interested, so as not to lead him on, I kept my responses short. The conversations went as follows. His intro line was, "You have so many freckles. They are in such random places. That's how freckles work. That is how you know you're a real redhead." I was creeped the fuck out at this point. I am well aware. He lingered to ask a couple more pointless questions until my friend and I managed to get away. My friend and I ended up going to a different bar across the street a little later in the night. We had settled into the new bar, a little drunker, and my friend went into the bathroom, leaving me at the high-top table up against the wall. The same man appeared out of nowhere to my left and put one arm against the table and the other against the wall, so I had nowhere to go. He said to me, "You're the redhead from before." Fellas, never physically trap a girl you're trying to hit on. I was extremely uncomfortable, but I figured my friend would be back soon and would be able to help me out of the situation without causing a scene. He asked me several awkward questions. Meanwhile, I had secretly texted my friend to hurry back and save me from this creepy guy. He then asked, "Take a picture with me." Why? For the memories. I was still trapped, and I was hoping that if I complied, he would leave me alone, so I let him take a picture of us while I was smiling a fake hostage smile. My friend had reappeared, but was standing by the bar and not approaching the table. I pretended to be drunker than I was and rushed over to her, gushing, "Oh my god, you're back. Let's go dance." I dragged her away and explained the situation. Fast forward a week. My next encounter with this man was at a completely different and very busy bar with a different female friend of mine. I was having a good time and suddenly I looked to the left and this man was, I kid you not, running in my direction, phone outstretched, with a picture that he forced to take with me on a screen. I had enough and was done being polite to save his feelings. As I sat there scared, I told him, "Leave me alone, you creep me out." He venomously replies, "Well, you're an ugly bitch anyways." My friend catches wind that something's going on, and as he walks away, they offered to protect me if needed. For months, I thought that would be my last interaction with this man. I was wrong. I had taken it as a warning, an example of how men's demeanors can change once they've been rejected, and it was chilling. 7 months later, I had forgotten about the prior encounters, and I was casually browsing the drugstore makeup display at night after the gym. I was looking down at a product when my spidey senses started going off. Someone was standing on the other side of the display and staring at me in my periphery. I look up and this man was 2 feet in front of me. I did not yet realize, but it was the same man. He asked me if the drugstore we were in sold chapstick. It's a drugstore. Everyone without fail sells chapstick. Taken aback, my initial thought was that he assumed that I was an employee, and I replied, "I don't work here." He smiled a slow smile, maintained eye contact, and said, "Okay." We both continued shopping until he returned to another makeup aisle that I was in at the store. He said, "I think I've met you before." I told him I don't believe we had, as I truly didn't remember him yet. He began to ask me questions that every girl my age in the city would answer yes to. "Have you been downtown before?" "Well, yeah, everyone has." "But like every weekend?" "Not every single weekend." "No, but last summer, with girls." At this point, I was getting a really bad feeling in my stomach, Everything about his body language, demeanor, and the things he was saying felt off, and he was staring. He insisted 2 more times that we had met and would not let it go, so I suggested, "Lots of people confuse me with other redheads they've met before. I'm sorry, I don't remember meeting you." He stared at me another moment and slowly said, "No, I know the redhead I spoke to." I began walking to the register and he followed. As I walked, it finally clicks in who it was, and I was afraid. His social awareness and weird questions made me sure it was him. I played it cool until I paid for my items and I was leaving the store. I didn't look back, but I knew he had items to pay for before he could follow. So as soon as I was at the door, I sprinted to my car, got in, locked it, and sat for a moment stunned as I processed what happened. I came to my senses quickly and I drove to the parking lot exit. I looked back and he was just outside the doors of the pharmacy, his head looking back and forth across the parking lot looking for me. I knew he saw my car leaving the parking lot, and since it was night, only a few people were at the pharmacy, so it was clearly me leaving. I took note of the car that he was walking to and decided to take an extra long route home to ensure I wasn't being followed. This route led through a wealthy neighborhood at the far east end of my city, so there is nothing that way aside from high-end homes. I looped through a roundabout in this neighborhood and I saw a car matching his drive straight through. There is no way to know if it was his, however, it was chilling. There were no signs of his car after that. A couple weekends later was my final encounter. It was St. Patty's Day, and the bars downtown were as packed as I've ever seen them. I was in the same bar he had first approached me in the months before, but I was alone as I was waiting for a friend to get through security. He rushes up to me from the crowd. He says, "Hey, I know you from the pharmacy." I had to assertly tell him to leave me alone multiple times. He kept asking, "Why, do you have a boyfriend?" I responded again, saying, "None of your business, leave me alone." It is interesting how some men only seem to take another man's claim to a woman as a no, and not a woman's obvious and direct disinterest. To this day, another 7 months later, that was the last I saw of him. I'm lucky these encounters were in public. They could have easily turned violent otherwise. I wrote this hoping to show other women being assertive and at times rude is completely okay and necessary to protect yourself. Some men don't take no for an answer that easily. To this day, it baffles me why he was trying so hard to make me remember him after he called me an ugly bitch. Always stay vigilant, ladies. Hello. I've wrote once before on Let's Not Meet, and today I was reading some submissions and it made me remember this event. At the time of the story, I was 14. As well as being younger, I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. With that being said, I was, and still am very vigilant about my surroundings. On this day, I had planned to stay the night at my friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. We always stayed at mine. For you to understand the story, I need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down the steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive. It looked like an old mansion. If you continued driving down, you'd be met with 2 semi-separated buildings. Both were small and run down. When I say small, I mean one of them was just a bedroom, and the other one was a bedroom with a small bathroom and kitchen. No door inside, just a piece of cloth to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mom lived in the other section with a bathroom kitchen. The landlord lived on the property in the main house, the big mansion. It was located in the middle of the woods, and when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. I mean all you could see was the expansive Australian forest. Australian rainforests are incredibly dense, and if you try to walk through it, you would most likely receive some sort of bite, whether it be a spider, ant, or leech. I'll cut to the first thing that happened. My friend and I had walked into her mom's flat. I forget why. I think we were either hungry or asking how to get reception. There was none. We called out for her mom. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past the small window, I heard, "Yeah?" come from outside. I turned to my friend, and she looked at me the same way I was. We were confused. If her mom was in the bathroom that was right in front of us, why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off as not trying to scare ourselves and continued having fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, the landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the section of the room with a tall shelf and divider. There is a huge glass sliding door in the front of her room, and in the block back section, there's another door. You couldn't get through that door unless you squeezed through a section outside. Now skipping forward a little to nighttime. My friend and I had just gone to the bathroom, so we had to slink out of her room and walk to her mom's flat. Her mom was fast asleep. We used the bathroom as quietly as possible and then exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods. A pair of eyes. They were looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone to take a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say that we were freaking out. We looked at the photo, and sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be a man staring at us from the dark woods. We were extremely scared, but I called my mom, who was about an hour away, and she dismissed us. After a while, we relaxed and chalked it up to our imaginations playing tricks on us, and I pulled out my laptop to put on a movie. I forget which movie, but it was a cheesy rom-com. Maybe 20 to 30 minutes into the movie, we froze and paused it. Footsteps. There were footsteps crunching on dry leaves right outside her room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed and looking over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence, it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against an object that was in the storage. Then it stopped. No more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to be as quiet as possible. Then the footsteps slowly crunched on the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both didn't hesitate now, and I reached for my phone to call the police. After trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. As we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ringing. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with a harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from the landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like 2 minutes, it stopped, and we heard his voice talking to the operator. At that time, we both noticed another thing. Fingerprints on her window. These windows were slanted glass that you could open up with a lever. Whoever left those prints reached up, cupped their hand around the top of the glass, and dragged their fingers on the dust. It wasn't there before. Soon, the landlord walked to the mother's unit and told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure that they didn't send a unit. Her mother came into her room, and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. I couldn't stay the night, and neither could my friend. We were both too scared to spend another minute there. I called my mom, and she came to get us at about 11 or 12. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something that I couldn't pass off as a coincidence. The night that this happened, it had been raining, and there was a strong wind, but not strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights. During the night, right after her and I were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind, this pole was literally embedded in cement and tied to other items with zip ties. There's no way it could have been the wind. That pole was sturdy. I'm still unsure of an explanation to all of this. It may have been her landlord. I'm not too sure. It could have also been her stepfather, who was pretty insane. Either way, to the man, or whoever it was, who tried to break into our room, please, let's not meet again. I do some volunteering at a hospital 3 times a week that involves me reporting to the hospital at 5 a.m. I enjoy volunteering. I've been doing it for almost 2 years, and I've never had any issues until last week. Last week, I was a bit early on one of my volunteer days, and had about 30 minutes before I had to report in. I normally would have just waited in my car, but I had been pretty stressed out about things in my personal life, so I thought that I would go for a little walk to burn off some steam and clear my head. After all, this was a pretty nice area, so what could go wrong? It's like 4:30 a.m., so naturally the streets are all quiet, but it seems pretty peaceful. Then up ahead I see someone walking in my direction. Kinda odd, I guess, but I didn't think too much of it. Him being out here at this hour isn't inherently suspicious. After all, does being out here at this hour automatically make me suspicious too? I keep walking. We make quick eye contact when we cross paths, and I suddenly got this bad feeling about this man. I can't explain it other than instincts. Sometimes you just have a bad gut feeling about someone, you know? That's what I felt as I passed this man, and I immediately went on high alert and made sure that he wasn't going to approach me from behind or something. Very soon after walking by this man, I'm talking about 15 to 20 seconds, I passed by one of the many parked cars on the street. Except this parked car is different. There's a man sitting at the wheel. The man waves at me and beckons me over. Again, pretty darn creepy, but not inherently worth freaking out over. But as I keep walking, I realize while the car was parked, it wasn't off. It was simply in park because the car starts driving in the same direction that I'm walking, and it drives at a pace essentially matching my walking speed. At this point, I've had enough and my brain is saying, nope. So I immediately turn around and start speed walking back in the direction I came from. Then I saw something that, in the moment, scared the fuck out of me. The first man that I had encountered walking in the other direction, which was now probably like 40 seconds ago, was now standing pretty close to me, like way closer than someone who had been walking in the other direction should be. And then he makes eye contact with me, then starts walking in my direction. I'm incredibly suspicious and more than a bit nervous at this point. And because it's pretty dark out, I decide to play a hunch. My car keys fold out in a manner very similar to a switchblade, so I immediately pull it out, press a button to make the key fold out, and stare at him for a second. I believe he was caught off guard because he stopped walking for a second. Well, that second was all I needed. I immediately took off running at top speed, crossed the street, and kept running down the street. I'm no Olympian, but I was on the cross-country team at the D2 college, and still run multiple times a week, so I'm pretty confident that I can outrun the average person by a comfortable margin. Still, I didn't want to take any chances, and ran all the way back to the hospital. So what do you guys think? I'm not crazy, right? I'm not necessarily saying that I was going to be the next prominent murder victim or kidnapping victim, but there was definitely something going on here, right? Someday in July 2023, my best friend called me to hang out. It was raining, and we thought going to his house was a good idea. He lives in a small apartment on the 5th floor. He has a balcony, and there's a small courtyard just underneath it. Like usual, I leave my house and walk. We live about 5 minutes from each other. I call him on the intercom, and he opens the door. I'm going into his apartment, and we decide to eat something. After that, we played some GTA 5 and listened to some music. It started to get boring, so we went outside on the balcony to smoke, and as we smoked, we saw a police officer in the courtyard. He seemed extremely stressed, traumatized, and he was smoking a cigarette while his hands were shaking. He was searching for something, searching in the bushes, in the trash, and didn't stop walking around. Inside of me, I already knew something was wrong. We went back into the apartment and everything was calm. We chilled out there for a few minutes and then decided to go out and meet a friend of ours. As we opened the front door, we saw the apartment next to us filled with tons of cops. They all seemed stressed as well, but we didn't know anything yet. We went down the stairs to leave and were stopped by two officers. They started to ask questions. Did you hear people crying in the last 20 minutes? Have you noticed anything weird these last few days? I said I didn't live here, and my friend said no. As we descended the stairs, we saw a lot of police cars and ambulances everywhere. I hadn't seen anything like this in my life. We opened the door to get outside and decided to sit a while. We called our friend and said that we were going to be a little late. As we watched, more and more people in the neighborhood had the same idea as we did. We talked with this nice guy to get information, but he didn't know any more than we did. The moment I knew things were bad was when I saw two unmarked cars arrived. A woman dressed all in white with a toolbox and a big camera around her neck got out. She looked in a hurry and got inside quickly. We immediately thought someone was dead. At first, we thought it was her husband. At the moment, everyone was inside and we just waited. 15 minutes later, we saw the paramedics coming down through the window of the stairs. They didn't have anyone with them. We were certain that someone had died there, so we waited even more, till we saw two men with a gray bag coming down the stairs. We didn't know who was in it, but we're 100% sure someone died. Things were getting slow and our friend was waiting for us, so we left and stayed out for a while. When we got back to his house, we saw the neighbor with handcuffs and the cops around her. She looked calm and very confident. This made me think she was innocent, even with the handcuffs. The day after that, I searched the news and found out that she had mental problems and killed her 1-year-old baby just 5 meters away from us. Her husband had fled the scene and was being sought out by the police. I had chills when I read it because I couldn't believe it was real. The day before she killed him, she was with her baby in the stroller, saying hello kindly to us. I still can't really believe it happened. Hi all, 34-year-old female. I'm not looking for advice, I just want to share my story. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along quite well. He presented gentlemanly, hospitable, kind, and loving. In hindsight, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month. Not enough time to truly know someone. This story is quite lengthy. I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. We saw each other daily. We mostly hung out at his home. That was fine with me in the beginning, as I'm rather introverted. A couple months into our relationship, I started to question why we weren't leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things and trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy. He always tried to redirect the conversation, thinking I was stupid and I couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. That was the point where I started becoming curious, and from there it went downhill. I'm not an intrusive person, but considering he was my partner, I had the right to inquire as to why we were isolating ourselves. After some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed he began to create distance. This noticeable change was hard to ignore, and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. However, I'm not going to make a decision based on assumptions. I'm ashamed to admit this, but one night while we were sleeping, I went through his phone. I still feel disgusting even though I found 100% proof that I was a side chick. I could not believe it. I still can't. I was with this person daily. It obviously confirmed why we were so confined to his house, but it was perplexing because she had no idea about me. It was about 2 a.m. when I looked through his phone. There was no way I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning. so I quietly got out of bed, collected my things, and went home. The next day, I believe he realized what had happened. However, he never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day, and then I received a phone call later in the evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say this, but I did take photos of the evidence as I knew he would try to gaslight me. The fury in his voice was palpable. He did what a usual abuser would do, blame me for going through his phone while totally ignoring his infidelity. It was utterly pathetic. He had created this delusion that I was going to contact the other girlfriend and tell her all of his wrongdoings, all his infidelity, lying, cheating. I would have done this, however, while I was looking through his phone, I realized that the girl was very sheltered. She was completely oblivious to what was going on. I was afraid that he would retaliate against myself and her, and I thought to myself that she would eventually find out. I do regret not informing her. However, my decision was my decision, and I can't change that. This is where my nightmare begins. He was so paranoid and confident that I was going to contact his girlfriend that he would constantly call me daily and make vague threats against me. I persistently advised him that I would not contact her, that it was none of my business, that she would eventually find out that he was a deceitful, inept brainworm sooner or later. All I wanted was for him to fuck off, leave me alone, and never speak to me again. That was my only request. He obviously didn't take my kind words so well, and he continued to harass me. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded to levels I've never seen before. He sent me threatening messages with the context being, "I have compromising photos of you, and I will release them," as he believed that I would ruin his relationship. I couldn't believe the delusion. No matter what I said, no matter how I phrased it, I even had my mom speak with him at one point, but it was useless. I sent him a message stating that if this was true, and if he ever messaged me again, I was going to call the cops. 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and personalized animation of myself. I had never seen those images, videos, and animations before. These were taken without my consent. These were extremely intimate and compromising. Unbeknownst to me, he had cameras set up all around his room. These weren't just threats, these were screenshots of these images, videos, and animations uploaded on various sharing sites. Luckily, he lacked intelligence. He sent me the evidence. There was nothing I could do to stop the uploads. I immediately went to the police. They did manage to take some down. However, there were no promises, as once a photo is uploaded, it could be immediately archived. This forever altered my life. I don't see relationships the same. I can't be intimate. I can't form strong bonds. I've become apathetic. I'm forensically observant. I have difficulty trusting everyone, even my family, and so much more. In conclusion, the police were rather efficient and treated me well. I was granted an immediate protection order, family violence order. He broke that quite quickly and called my phone, trying his best to apologize, begging me to drop the charges. He was so pathetic that he got his mommy to ring me and tried to persuade me. I immediately called the police and they took immediate action. This ended up going to court. I won. It's not the result that I wanted. However, he did get his name on the good old sex offender registry, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nevertheless, this is beyond life-changing. To all who have gone through this, I'm sorry, and I feel your pain. Be careful around people who you think you can trust. I know that's quite nihilistic and pessimistic, but those are some of the unfortunate aspects of life. It's quite paradoxical. Humans are social creatures, but many humans are pure rat shit. Disclaimer: I don't think all homeless people are scary, or bad-intentioned, or creepy. I do think this encounter with this homeless person was creepy, however. This happened in 2019. I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner at the time. We were saving up to buy a house. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. This house was on the street that dead-ended to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. There were always homeless people walking by our house. Most of them never caused any problems. There's another piece of backstory you need to know, and it's my sister is special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old. This particular day, my mom had taken our dogs to the vet. My partner was at work. My dad was working in the backyard. This left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mom and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us saying, "This is my friend Julia." Behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because the woman could have been friends with my sister, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs, and we didn't necessarily know all of her friends. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations with. So my mom says, "Oh, you know my daughter? We're getting to know each other." "How are you getting to know each other?" "Oh, well, I live on the corner." "You live around the corner?" "No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in." At this point, my mom was speechless. I'd never seen her speechless in my life. I whispered to her, "Get her out." Julia is kind of pacing around, grabbing more food from our kitchen. She's acting erratically, as if she's on drugs. I again tell my mom, "Get her the fuck out." My mom says, "I know that, but what if she has a knife or gun or something? I need to do it carefully." My mom follows Julia into the kitchen and says, "I'm so sorry, you need to leave now because I need to go run an errand." Julia ignores her request. At this point, I look into the bathroom where there's a pile of Julia's things. Again, my mom tells her that she needs to leave. Julia agrees and then goes into our bathroom and locks the door. She was in there for a while. It felt like forever, but it was probably around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain that she was doing drugs. Finally, Julia has all her stuff and leaves, taking socks and snacks with her. I run to get my dad and we all debrief. It seems like what we could get out of my sister was that Julia knocked on the door asking for a tampon, in which my sister lets her in, trying to be helpful. Julia realized that she was practically alone with what looks like a child and takes full advantage, stealing clothes and shoes from us. We have a serious talk with my sister and tell her that she can never open the door for strangers. We spend the next few months worrying that Julia would spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. This is a story that pops back into my mind from time to time. I've told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was 10 years old, my mom finally decided it was time for her to start taking lessons to get her driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided he wanted to do some practice with her, besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she would pass the upcoming test first try. My brother and I were attending swimming lessons at a nearby university at that time. Behind a forest area near the university lays a huge student parking area surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw that as an opportunity to take my mom there to drive around a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them, since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. We arrived at the parking lot later on in the evening. My parents began their practice. My brother and I quickly got bored though, and we asked if we could go to the little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us since they always were able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around in the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulls up into the lot. We were playing almost right next to the exit entrance. The car turns around and stops on my right side, with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down the window and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was good looking and young. I guess would be around 30. This is where things start to get weird. In the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could really see was her blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police and that we have to get in the car immediately, as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck out my arm in front of his chest, as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us again to get into his car, or else he would have to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly the woman put down the newspaper, showing her face, and told us in the most calm, motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive to us, since the road down from the parking lot was twisted away. Then it would take longer to drive than to cut through the field. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could. "Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck away from my children!" As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized that my brother and I weren't alone, he threw the car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shot himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat the guy himself. This resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who those people were, but this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you and the ones you love. I'm not sure what these people would have done with us. I am sure about one thing though. They definitely weren't from the police. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what the beeping sound was all about. For those who don't know, an Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information like the victim's appearance, as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, make and model of vehicle. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room. An Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory that I have, where I believe with all my heart that I was almost kidnapped when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was laying dormant in my subconscious, and this random Amber Alert and a talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. This incident is something I pondered and thought about off and on for years. I'm a male, 41 years old now, by the way. It's just been a while since I've considered the factors and details of the experience, and this recent Amber Alert and talk with my daughter caused me to pause and reflect on the incident itself once again, and here I am. As a parent, you worry about these things and do all you can to protect your child, especially when you've personally experienced something truly scary like this. This happened when I was a young kid. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think it's a safe estimate based on the fact much of those early childhood memories aren't there anymore. I do remember my kindergarten experience, which I would have been 5 or 6, and also later grades, so this incident must have happened sometime after, or around the ages of 7 to 8. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town with not much to offer, So from time to time we would go to the neighboring city about 45 minutes away from where we were located. It just had more to offer. They would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because restaurants were better, and because my mom was a crafter. She loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were different craft stores and fabric stores she liked going to up there. This specific trip, we went to a fabric store up there, Joanne Fabrics to be exact. This was a pretty big store. As a little kid, I guess most places seemed pretty big, but no kidding, this was a sizable store. My dad stayed in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot. When there was a store he just didn't want to go in, and I can't blame him there. I can't recall exactly what my mom was looking for or trying to get in the store, but I do remember what section we were in. An area with a bunch of racks and various fabrics hanging. Imagine a clothing store with circular racks with clothes hanging around them. And that's pretty much what it looks like in a fabric store. Racks of hanging fabric. I remember this area being slightly towards the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these racks, I began to wander, though not far, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started wandering around. That's my guess at least. But I could still see my mom just a few racks over, so it wasn't like I was on the other side of the store or anything. A random man approached me, and honestly, I can't remember what direction he came from. I was there by myself one minute, and the next, I look up and saw this guy. It was like he came in fast and out of nowhere. I quickly looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a few racks up and away, but I could still see her. There was a fair distance between my mom and I at this point. So here I am standing behind some racks of fabric with this older guy opposite me in the other side of the rack. Then he speaks. "Hey little boy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this completely took me off guard. "Where are your folks at? Are you alone in here?" I stood still and quiet. "Come here, I got something to show you." At this point he started advancing towards me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other way, as if to meet me in the middle. I was scared at this moment and became instantly aware that this man seemed dangerous and like he was trying to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked fast to the left, but he did the same. He had this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I went, he followed. But remember, there's a rack between us. God, I'm so thankful for the rack. After some back and forth moments from me and the man, I finally lock in on my mom and yell, "Mom, help!" You would have thought I was screaming bloody murder, and it was so loud it got my mom's attention. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over my shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed, yep, that must be his mother. His demeanor completely changes, as if everything was just fun and games, and that he was just messing around. He said as much to my mom. "I was just messing around with him. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to where I was, and as we reconnected, the guy just tips his hat at my mom and makes his way out of the store. I explained to my mom what just happened, that the guy was trying to get me. I was so upset and shook up. She told me that I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. It was terrifying, for sure. I'm thankful something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things like maybe this guy was really just messing around? I very much think that there was nefarious intentions. Why would a random guy be pursuing me in a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts and fabrics, why promptly leave when confronted? I truly believe that he was up to no good. Anyway, that's my story. I appreciate anyone that took the time to read. Back around 1991, I was 20 and newly single from my first love, unemployed and living with two friends. I started hanging out with one of my friends' church friends. kind of like street church people. No denomination, basic Christian beliefs, nothing crazy at all. Anyways, there's about 5 of them sharing a pretty big apartment, and we would all hang there, and many people would drop by. Then this one girl, Bernice, dropped by one day. A very pretty girl, by the way, but around 7 to 8 years older than I was. And when you're 20, that seems like a pretty significant age difference in my opinion. But whatever, irrelevant I suppose. Although she was pretty, I just wasn't immediately into her, is my point. Once she first saw me in the apartment though, she would not stop staring at me the entire time she was there. And she was very obvious about it, and everyone at the apartment could tell that she was acting really creepy towards me. Everyone was kind of looking at her, noticing that she was very fixated, and I remember them trying to talk to her to get her out of her trance, but she would barely acknowledge anyone else talking to her. There was so much tension in the 1 or 2 hours she was there. I was new amongst this group, and a shy person in general, so I didn't want to come out and ask, "What the fuck is going on?" as I'm sure many other people would have. So I just stayed in the corner and kept watching TV and tried not to look in her direction. Then, once she finally left, I could breathe again. They eventually admitted to me that she had a few psychological problems, is the best way I can remember their description. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember exactly what they said. After this revelation, her weird behavior made a smidge more sense, but it still didn't point to what this all had to do with her fixation towards me that night. Maybe it was because I was the new guy in the group that night, and she wasn't used to seeing anyone new. Who knows, I thought. Regardless, it was disturbing and made me anxious about seeing her again. So about a week later, I think, I drop in, and everyone is staring at me when I walk through the door. "What's going on?" I asked. "Bernice was here today." "And?" "She left a letter that she wrote for you here." She had written a 2 to 3 page letter to me that she left on the table for everyone else to read if they wanted to, which is why they were all acting freaked out when they told me about it. Anyways, they all told me it wasn't good. Basically, from what I can recall, she starts out quite rambling about when she first saw me she thought I was Jesus. And then it goes on from there about, "I'm not 100% sure if you are or not, but I think you are, and I love you with all my heart. Can't stop thinking about you. I want to be together," etc., etc., etc. I almost shit myself halfway through reading this thing. Everyone there was in suspense as they were watching me read it. Once I was done, and I was probably pale as a ghost, I seem to remember them telling me not to worry about it too much, and that they would make sure that she would not come around, especially if I was there. In a nice way, mind you. Then, being in a relatively small town, about a year more later on, I bump into her at a club. It was maybe 2 or 3 days before Christmas, and I said hello to be polite because she came right up to me. My heart was in my throat. I imagine I was probably sweating profusely in that instant. I remember her talking to me kind of normal for a few minutes. Normal chit-chat about how I was and stuff. So I thought, okay, maybe she's come to her senses a little. I was hoping and praying. I let my guard down a little and started to relax. Within 5 minutes of the conversation though, she drops a bomb and invites me to a Christmas supper at her mom's house, with just her and her mother. This may sound innocent and possibly a nice thing to do under normal circumstances, but not in these circumstances. This was way too much. I was out pretty damn quick. I ordered a board game on Amazon last week. It got delivered today. I was just sitting on the couch when I get a phone call. The guy doesn't speak my language, but I understand that it's the delivery guy. I reply yes in the language he was speaking when he says, "Are you home?" I start to run downstairs because our intercom isn't working while this guy screams on the phone with me to open the door. He starts kicking the building's front door, which made me stop a little, as I'm a girl and both my boyfriend and roommate were upstairs, but I'd be going downstairs by myself. When I got there, he had dropped the package on the front step and was standing far off. He looked distraught and his eyes were red. He asked if the package was for me, and I nodded and grabbed my package and closed the door as soon as possible. I'm terrified that he might come back since he knows where I live. I don't know why he was acting that way. I was as fast as I could be. Update: I've reported him to Amazon. They will investigate the situation and reach out to me if need be.